Hello everyone. Today I'd like to talk to you about the civil service, or as it's officially called, Her Majesty's Home Civil Service, which is in a way a branch of the government, you might say, or at least it helps the government in running the country. On their website, they describe their function as follows, and I quote: "The civil service helps the government of the day develop and implement its policies as effectively as possible." So they take care of the day-to-day running of the country, basically. And in doing that, for instance, they also come into direct contact with the population. They are the ones, for instance, who will issue driving licenses, who will make sure that benefits and pensions are paid. There are a number of characteristics of the civil service that the civil servants themselves are very proud of. And maybe the most important of them is that they are politically impartial. No civil servant has a link with any political party. No civil servant is politically appointed. No, they are impartial and independent of the government, in spite of the fact that they provide support for the government. They are also permanent, and that is very much in contrast with the politicians themselves, with the government which changes regularly. Not so the civil service. They remain. There are well over 400,000 civil servants in Britain, and they are divided across different departments, and each department of the civil service supports a department of the government, a ministry, if you want. And at the head of each department of the civil service, you have a so-called permanent secretary. He's the head of that department. And also in his name, you can see the permanent character of the civil service. Permanent secretary. At the core of the civil service, you have the so-called cabinet office. Much smaller. About 2,000 people work for the cabinet office. The cabinet office doesn't have a permanent secretary. It has the cabinet secretary. And what does the cabinet office do? Well, they support the cabinet, meaning the Prime Minister and the most important of his ministers, the core of the government. The cabinet office, they support the cabinet. They also ensure the coordination of all the civil service departments, making sure that they all work together seamlessly. And in general, they make sure that there is a smooth running of the government. That's the task for the cabinet office, the core of the civil service. Now, in principle, the civil service and the government, they work together seamlessly without any problems at all. But in reality, there is very often a tension between the government and its ministers and the civil service or the civil servants of a particular department. And that is the same tension as the tension between the characteristics of the two. The government always feels the urge for change. They work very often for the short term, because they know come the next elections they might be voted out. So they want to change things. On the other hand, you have the civil service, which relies on its permanency, on stability, they're in the game for the long term, and they don't want every single minister to start changing things too often. Now, that tension is portrayed with wonderful insight in two sitcoms, old sitcoms by now, from the 1980s, called Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. There were 3 seasons of Yes Minister, which were broadcast between 1980 and 1984, and 2 series of Yes Prime Minister, broadcast between 1986 and 1988. The writers of those series, they had access to real inside information from the civil service. And they made that into a very, very humorous series, which was always about that tension between the minister and the permanent secretary of the department, and later on in the second series between the prime minister and the cabinet secretary. The series got high praise from politicians and from some very high-ranking politicians also, including Margaret Thatcher. It got its praise because those politicians said, and still say to this day, that the series was made very true to life. So if you ever get the chance, do have a look at a couple of episodes from Yes Prime Minister or Yes Minister. It's well worth your while. You will laugh, I'm sure of that. All right, that was what I wanted to say about the civil service. Hope you found it interesting. Please like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you want to. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.